Да. Дякую.
Колеги, останній на сьогодні наш прес-брифінг. Я запрошую до слова Дмитра Шимківа, заступника глави адміністрації президента, який відповідає за напрям впровадження реформ. Вчора відбулося
Yesterday there was the first meeting of the National Council on Reforms. I believe Dmytro Shymkiv, the presidential administration deputy head, will talk about that, and he will talk about the status of the reforms in other sectors. Thank you. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Really. Yesterday, on the 24th of December at 5 o'clock p.m., there was the first working meeting with the participation of the President of Ukraine, Prime Minister, the head of the National Bank, the Secretary of National Defense and Security Council, the heads of the committees of Verkhovna Rada, and participants from the civil society who are members of the National Council of Reform. There was the meeting of the National Council of Reforms. It lasted for almost 3 hours. Despite the fact that it was an hour longer than it was planned. That was the result of big interest from the participants. The agenda was in two parts. The first one was about strategic vision of the development of Ukraine mechanisms and implementation strategy 2020. Which was approved by the National Council of Reforms and is to be signed by the President. That's on the Executive Committee. It was about creating the project office for the money from the EBRD. The second part was about discussing the 4 key reforms and the development of these reforms, but first it was analysis of executing the agreement with association agreement with the European Union, then judicial reform, anti-corruption reform, and reform of the civil service and the regulation. And these reforms were presented by respective people. Decisions were made on each of them. As to judicial reform, the legislative initiatives are to be submitted in January. The initiatives on the key laws on judiciary, on the status of judges, and so on. An important issue was the discussion between the representatives of the civil society, the representatives of the authorities, the members of the Cabinet of Ministers, and the MPs. The National Council has demonstrated itself as a very good platform for defining the tasks which are to be implemented, and I had a meeting on preparing the resolutions and orders. Later I will answer the questions because we have many pieces of news.
About the plan of the restoration of the country, during yesterday's session, Volodymyr Groysman has officially passed the plan 2015-2017 to the President and the Prime Minister and suggested that it is worked upon in order to present it at the international conference next year. The plan 2015-2017 was prepared by the team of Volodymyr Groysman based on the Ministry for Regional Development. Also, there were representatives from the President's administration and international experts. This is a significant document. It also was sent in a soft copy to all the members, all the participants in the conference, and it provides for, it defines key indicators that the country has to reach by 2017. several initiatives that are being worked upon now. Deregulation, as you remember, electronic tenders and purchases are one of the elements of deregulations. So we also discussed electronic purchases, procurement, as one of the elements of fight against corruption. On the 22nd of December, the presentation of this electronic procurement system happened. It is now being tested, and Kyiv City Council and Lviv City Council take part in this testing. The system allows to announce the purchase, accept applications, and to hold the auction. And the auction happens in 3 rounds and is realized in a way to lower the starting price as much as possible. Starting from January, the procurers will start to make their purchases in this way, and it is applied to purchase of commodities up to 1,100 hryvnia and the services up to 1 million hryvnia. The Prime Minister yesterday emphasized that legislative initiatives about the thresholds of electronic purchases, it is already submitted to the Parliament. So we hope that apart from the system that already exists, we also have the legal field, which will allow to spread the use of electronic purchases to other spheres. Prom, Ugrey, and Smart and the Biz are the grounds that take part in this, and 3 additional sites will be taking part in this, because, as we remember, the system uses private grounds for the work, and this all happens within one system. The system is balanced and allows to use the best features of all the sites. Yesterday, the Cabinet of Ministers, represented by the State Office on European Integration and the Secretariat of the Cabinet of Ministers, they presented the status of events pertaining to the implementation of the association agreement, where economic issues are concerned, and in part we were informed. Often we don't hear the figures, but this is important to know that the movement is on. So the plan of events for implementation until 2017 provides for almost 500 tasks in all spheres of cooperation between Ukraine and EU, and also the implementation of 165 European laws. Now there are 7 resolutions of the Cabinet of Ministers on the introduction of 32 plans of implementation of 37 legislative acts. At the moment, the preparation goes on 59 implementation plans in different spheres of the economy. I remind you that Strategy 2020 provides for suggests the preparedness of Ukraine to file the application for the membership, and also there's a criteria of necessary measures that have to be effected in order to meet membership requirements. Now, about in recent time, and this is the issue that is on agenda, this is the more active cooperation with international institutions, because changes in the country do require financial support. several facts and information about the agreements signed here, because they are defining agreements in the investment projects, and also the active work of the government and the president in order to achieve necessary results. As of today, the portfolio of international financial organizations on the stage of realization is composed of 32 investment projects that were attracted by the state or under state guarantees. The total amount is $7 billion. In December, we signed 3 important projects in spite of the complicated situation, like preparation of the budget and the formation of the Cabinet of Ministers. I want to thank everybody who took part in this. Reconstruction and technical re-equipment of the pipeline Urengoy-Pomare-Ruzhero. This is the loan from European Investment Bank, 150 million euro, and $200 million loan from the EBRR. Also, very important project, the European Investment Bank, the main loan for small and medium-sized businesses, which is practically the project of credit in small and medium businesses. This is 400 million euro. This is very important because the development of entrepreneurship and the creation of favorable conditions for small and medium business is very important, and 200 million euro from the EBRD, and also 2 systemic projects about the policy in the financial sector. The EBRD is going to allocate almost $500 million for this, and also for the EBRD another $500 million from EBRD for the development. From 18th to 19th December, from 8th to 19th December, there was a mission working in Ukraine about the preparation of the meeting that has to review the standby program, and this all emphasizes and underlines the work from on the side of the Cabinet of Ministers and on the side of the President's team in order to realize the initiatives that are sometimes not noticed in the media space. And very briefly, similarly, we are now discussing the agreement according to the agreement between Mr. Poroshenko and Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan in Milan, about the contract or agreement with Japan. There was a special meeting, special negotiations on the agreement of the draft agreement about partnership and investment between Ukraine and Japan. Now coming back to the National Council for Reforms, some organizational issues. They have approved the creation of the project office. That means the creation of offices of project managers who will help the government and different state institutions who are engaged in implementing the reforms. In particular, this is the monitoring of reforms, the formation of working groups for MRs, and introduction of project management to reforms. As every reform has its start and has its end, they also have their own budgets, and they should be involved. They will require some tax expenditures, and a project manager is needed for every reform, because this is they who will be presenting material for discussion to the National Council of Reforms. The process will be systematized, and we use the experience of the majority of countries in the world who introduced reforms, and also those who came through the entire way of joining the European Union.
Because I come here for briefings once in 2 weeks, and a lot of things have happened. But one more thing I would like to inform you about, it's on reforming the administration of the President of Ukraine and on implementation of the law on cleaning the authorities, some statistical data in accordance with the law on cleaning the authorities. We are now doing the auditing of the heads of the state service of state security service, the heads of regional and district administrations and some other bodies. Numbers of persons which are being inspected, 379 persons. This is the leadership of different institutions, 41, 261 the heads of regional and district administrations. Now, as to persons, the decision, according to them, was to dismiss them, and the result of that inspection, there are 7 people who are to be dismissed. In order, we are publishing the information about the whole process on our website. This process is not very easy. We prepared the package of several packages. Each package has 7 documents which are sent to the Ministry of Justice, and the requests are sent to 6 or 7 different ministries in order to implement the law on cleaning the authorities. When we analyzed 379 persons, we had to generate 2,653 packages of requests for information, based on which we get answers, and then we send them. They will be prepared and they will be channeled to the inspection offices, and this is a very complicated process. Very often people are talking about that, and I'm trying to explain what it consists of. It's not easy. It's processing huge numbers of documents in very short time frame. That's it. I'm ready to answer the questions. If you have questions on the details of the meeting of the National Council of Reforms, I do have information about implementation of different reforms. We'll leave all this information for the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. These are materials for this meeting, the texts and the status of different reforms. And could you give us a short version of what was discussed yesterday? I will mention the reforms. There was an interesting discussion about organization as well, but talking about anti-corruption component, we need to understand the status. During the last months, there were different events taking place as to fighting corruption. Certain processes and procedures were started. On the 10th of April, the law on amendments to the law on public procurements was passed. Also on the 14th of June, there were some laws passed on Anti-Corruption Bureau, the National Commission on Anti-Corruption under the Cabinet of Ministers. In general, talking about conclusions, the President emphasized how important and urgent the process of anti-corruption work. We expect that there will be 3 representatives from the Verkhovna Rada appointed to the Commission on selecting the chairperson of Anti-Corruption Bureau, the Minister of Justice informed about what's being done with setting up the National Commission, which is set up in order to implement, execute inspections, the National Agency on Preventing Corruption. And that is on inspecting the civil servants, checking their declarations. The decision was made to approve some additional steps which are to be made. Also, it's important to create in January the National Council on Anti-Corruption Policy. Also, the decision was made that the Executive Committee has to monitor all these things and they have to report what has been done, what we lack. And this should be coordinated with different institutions. As to judicial reform, that was the biggest discussion. During the discussion itself, we reported that we have a council where 32 people are working from the International Association, from the Ministry of Justice, the representative of administration, Alexei Filatov, who chairs this council. Most of the proposals are on powers of the judges, on how decisions are to be made. These are systemic changes. I will not be able to explain that in 5 minutes. But the President, the Prime Minister participated in this discussion, the civil society, and the judicial reform, and introducing legislative initiatives in January next year was mentioned. The decision was made on that the draft laws are to be submitted to the Verkhovna Rada in January next year. As to the regulation, the Minister of Economy presented what has been done, the steps which are planned, some legislative initiatives which are submitted to the Parliament. Also, European Business Association provided comments on the current situation with the business on issues of anti-monopoly committee. And the cases claims what business feels. There was a discussion in which the representatives of the Cabinet of Ministers and the Parliament participated. And we were talking about the importance of continuing the regulation, including accelerating the process. If you remember, the Cabinet of Ministers passed some deregulation initiatives on changing or amending the regulatory bodies. And one more discussion we had, it was the law on civil service. During this discussion, we understood that the situation, that the law has two parts. The first one is the Foundation for Civil Service, and that's the result of work for 6 months, twinning project, European Community, Sigma was involved into that. That is the foundation creating the non-political positions of state secretaries. And the second one was motivation and financing. And we had a big discussion of the second part of it because the situation is the limits in the current budget. And we need to increase the salary for civil servants. We need to change the structure and functions. And the decision was made to to set up a group with international experts who could develop a model of how this could be done. Because now we cannot increase salaries to civil servants because we don't have money for that. How this could be done, we understand that the low salaries in civil service, that's the reason or the what can cause corruption. But the solution to this problem hasn't been offered, and now we are trying to find some solution to that during the first half a year. One of the decisions made by the president, is that the proposals of reforms are to be presented at such council, and the council has to discuss very complicated issues. The ministers will be presenting that, and we had a very good discussion on very complicated issues, and some of them we heard the point of view of the president, of the prime minister, of the civil society. So basically, this national council started operating, but we started the process 4 months ago, but unfortunately, to get it working, we needed both the parliament and the government, and that was a political process. Thank you.
Two questions. Was I correct in understanding you that this month we have got almost 900 million? We just signed the agreements. The money is not here yet, but the agreements, this thick. And another 2 projects to the tune of $1 billion. I'll explain why am I dwelling on this in such detail. I want to get the understanding that this is also the issue of reform and attracting money to pay for many strategic goals of the government and the president. Sometimes this is omitted, but I think that this is important. As a person who has been working for 5 months quite recently in the state service, I see what a huge amount of work this is. People work round the clock. 2 weeks ago, you told us about how foreigners were selected for different state positions. Ukraine asked international recruiters to look for those ministers. How much did we pay? Well, there were, of course, press releases. $82,200 US were paid by Renaissance Foundation to 2 foreign companies who recruited those ministers. The country has not spent a kopeck from its budget. Look, this is very important to underline, because no one paid for the ministers for recruiting. You know how you ask the questions, so because there are cool slogans. There was a project of the National Council of Reforms in order to involve international recruiters to look for potential candidates. 24 candidates were the results of this search, and those nominations were given to the coalition. And I guess now you'll take the sum divided by the number of ministers, but in fact there were many more candidates, and this was done, the final selection was done by the politicians, but our task was to provide them with an opportunity to choose. And this is why we were set up. We asked Renaissance Foundation to finance this process, and everything was transparent. Yesterday at the conference, Petro Poroshenko said that he still has some surprises up his sleeve about the appointment of foreigners. You know, these are surprises by the president, and better than president, no one knows. I wouldn't even like to try to steal the branch of priority from the president. I think this is going to be rather interesting. I wanted to ask you about the project office, when they will start to work and who will be working, and how often do you plan to convene the National Council for Reforms? The council has to sit once 2 months, but I think that we will gather at least once a month, or once a month and a half. So our next session is going to happen in the beginning of February. We would like to talk about the reform of law enforcement bodies, because there's a lot of projects there, and there's a team who are prepared to do this. And of course, we will discuss other topics as well, because the National Council for Reforms should consider more or less prepared documents. Second, about the project office. The project office we have to finalize with the EBRD after the 5th of January, because they are all on vacation now. We have to finalize the memorandum and the agreements, because we have most of the materials already drawn. We were waiting for the session of the National Council of Reform. There will be a contest to look for the head of the project office, the person who will coordinate project managers. We're in consultations with the ministers and also the Secretary of the Council for National Defense and Security and Defense. Because there are issues, and we have to hold consultations about the people who potentially may become project managers. There will be a transparent contest, which is a requirement of the EBRD, but we need to fulfill 3 functions of the project office. First, this is coordination and support in drawing up the reforms. You know, this is a process. We have to gather everyone and all people who are involved in this. Those could be ministers, deputy ministers, the committee of the parliament, and representatives of the public. And those group has to work rather regularly, probably once a week, working on certain material and working out certain models of cooperation with international institutions. I can take as an example the Anti-Corruption Bureau or the Law on State Service, where the working group was working seriously, and there was a project manager. Another issue is the issue of communications. There is a huge problem in this, both domestically and internationally. Unfortunately, many people in the international community do not know much about the steps that were taking place here. And third issue, there's a lot of decisions that's been approved, and now they have to be implemented. In order to do this, there has to be a public presentation, and then reminding officials that some dates are coming, and they are closer than the ones left in the rear view window. Though sometimes you need a team who will remind you and draw certain documents. And the skills of a project manager is the skill to communicate. This has to be a person who can really lead the international project and control how it is being fulfilled and involve additional money. There's a lot of organizational work. And also the skill to be a moderator of a discussion. These people should not be probably super experts in their topic, but they have to combine and to coordinate and to lead the discussion that's happening around this or that reform. I understand there's a great appetite for immediate reforms. That even yesterday during the session of the National Council of Reform, every reform had several options. Everybody understands that at the first level about the judges, we have solved all the issues. But when we go down to other things, we see that there's a lot of points of compromise that should be and can be reached, and this is the task of project manager, to help people arrive at compromise points of view that then can be tabled to the National Council reform. I want to remind of the words of President who said that the main task of the National Council for reforms, because the President is here, the government and here, the Parliament and public activists, this is the place where they agree all the issues, and otherwise we won't understand what to do with what. Otherwise, there were cases in the Ukrainian history when we announced reforms that were not in agreement with any other sphere. Several other questions about the state service. This law on state service, you still have to vote for it, but you announced about the temporary involvement of people from the business. But now you said that there will be a group that will work on this. Okay. We have the law on state service. And there has been one group, because there are two topics there. One of them is the contest selection, the principles of work, two types of offices. These are the foundations of state service. And there's an element in this law, payment and raising salaries. I just give you an example. Since 2011, the law of about state law has been passed, but it's not implemented because it requires the increase in money. So the question about the fundamental principles did not cause any objections, but the issue of compensation, they are complicated, they require additional work, and the creation of a model as a process of transfer. Like here we have our current salaries, but we have to arrive at another level. IMF understands that we have no money, but they still have to create conditions to fight corruption, so they have to look for a compromise. So this group has to develop this approach. Another issue about the temporary office in the state work, the draft law is there. We want to table it to the Parliament in January, but there's also the issue of discrimination, the discrimination of state servants. If we pass this law, we will be able to pay only new state servicemen, people who came now, not the old ones. So we have the opinion from the Europeans that this clause is rather is a limitation. We understand this, and we are looking for other options of solving the problem. We understand that the year 2015 will be rather complicated because of the GDP, because of the revenue of the state and the budget. So I think that sober-mindedness and understanding of all Ukrainians in this term should be responsible, because without carrying social functions, we cannot upkeep this apparatus, this staff of state service. These are two different components, but it's all about how you can pay state officials, state servants with a salary, with a dignified salary. It was announced that since the 1st of January, the administration of the president switches to electronic documentation.
We have discussed it with the president and can demonstrate what it is. We have a video, a training video, specially made for the civil servants of the administration of the president about how to use this system. To start one of the process is we will not completely move to paperless document circulation. And there should be the electronic digital signature, which requires approximately 4 months of work, and we are trying to do that in 2 days. We find some alternatives, and we are also considering some package of legislative initiatives on digital Ukraine. That is the first package of initiatives which will help us simplify the regulatory acts to introduce electronic systems much faster, because everything is over-regulated now. And some people who do not want to use this system, they say, well, we have the law, there should be the digital signature, so now the guys are working on the digital signature, but the system's ready. We have portals, we have the possibility to see the information. You can find any information which is created, which is developed in the administration of the president. There are 5 main processes. 2 are automated. There are processes where there's an issue of confidentiality and the issue of preparing the acts of president. These are about some constitutional things, so we have suspended these projects, but our main task now is to train, to explain, to implement. Technologically, the system is operating, is working. I believe it's not difficult to build the system, but it's difficult to start using it. Every participant has own electronic digital virtual committee, and we see all the tasks, and we it can help you find the solution. They can create new documents. It's all on the computer. You also mentioned that every reform will have its own budget. Where will you get this money from? And how many such reforms will there be? Will there be like 10, 12, 20 of the reforms? Any reform has some expenditures. If we are talking about the reform of the civil service, if we are talking about dismissing some people, that means expenditures to dismiss them, or increase of salary means increase. If it's about the reform of energy sector, that also means some expenditures. Some of them could be covered at the expense of the state budget. This could be paid by donors, projects, loans, whatever. The form of financing is to find financing. To introduce reforms, you need to develop the reform and evaluate it. How much will the reform of public health cost? This should be done by the new team in the Ministry of Public Health, and that is a complicated process. You have to understand what should be the expenditures, what should be the burden on the budget. Do we need to attract some other sources of financing? In any case, the team has to realize where do we get money from. It's like the initiatives on attracting money to stimulate entrepreneurial activity, infrastructural projects. Then there was another issue, another question. In the strategy 2020, we outlined 60 reforms which Ukraine has to implement to achieve a certain objective in 2020. Now we focus on first aid and 2 programs. These are the priorities. It's about the system of public administration, the reform of health sector, energy independence, tax reform, and others. Well, financially, it's unrealistic. 60 project managers. Then not all the projects cannot start immediately. Some of the reforms will start not earlier than in a year and a half, because that's about European legislation. We have certain issues, and some reforms are to start in 2016 or 17, and some reforms, if we reorganize ministries, if we pass the law on civil servant, if we resolve the issue of good salaries for civil servants, then we will not need project office like it was in Poland. In Baltic states, they first had some agency which was later became like the state. We need to put foundation for project management. Thank you, Dmytro. And we look forward to seeing you in the new year. And I would like to congratulate you, to greet you with the upcoming holidays. Wish us all, first of all, peace, because that's the most important. And believe